Hosanna Block, and it's actually made up of 4 blocks that I'll call the palm block, P-A-L-M, and these are paper pieced. And I say originally, this is the original one where they all come together and they're oriented this way. What I started to do after I pieced everything and tried to sew these together, all of these big pieces of fabric just made a mess of the seams, so I decided to put sash in between mine. So if you pull these apart and you put a sash between the 2 blocks here, and then I flipped them around. I had them coming out from the center. So if we put sashing here between the blocks, and we put a sashing here between these rows, then we have the revised block that is used in this quilt. The reason I did this is a 1-inch cut sash, and they're all 1-inch cut because it's the smallest you could get without overlapping your seam allowances. So it ends up to be 1/2 inch finished, and it really was a lot easier to work with than you think it would be. If you have an AccuQuilt and you have the 1-inch strip cutter, these will go very fast when you're cutting, and otherwise it goes pretty fast cutting even if it is a 1-inch strip. So this is the block we're going to make for this quilt. Here are the instructions you can download from my blog, and the link is in the description of the video. So this is the quilt, the layout I'm using, and this is the Hosanna block we just looked at, the original or traditional Hosanna block, and here is our block we're using for this quilt. And I've also included in the instructions this template, the paper piecing template. And you'll see the block is divided into a left side and a right side. So you'll have to piece both of these to make one palm block. I'm not going to show you how to do the paper piecing, but I am going to show you how to cut the pieces of fabric for the paper piecing. In my quilt, I used scraps for all of the paper pieced blocks, and the background fabrics I chose were mostly tone-on-tone white, but there were some other light colors and maybe some low volume prints that made their way into the quilt, and I think that's just fine. You could scrap it up and use low volume. You could use all white, tone-on-tone, all solids, whatever it is you want to use a light color. And I'm going to show you how to cut the pieces for the accent fabric. So you need a piece about 8 inches square, and we're going to cut it in half. So I'll put this here, and here's half. So you'll have 2 pieces at 8 inches by 4 inches. Then we're going to place these wrong sides together, like this, and then we're going to cut across the diagonal. And these don't have to be exact because these are for your paper piecing. It's going to be trimmed off a lot later. So here are your pieces you have. You have 2 left sides, and you flip them over, and you have 2 right sides. So those are going to go here with the background fabrics for the left and the right sides of the paper pieced pattern. Remember this pattern. And for the next 2 pieces, or 4 pieces, we're going to take 2 pieces of 7-inch square fabric, and we'll put them wrong sides together. And we're going to cut these in half, so it would be 3.5 inches each. Now you have your 2 rectangle stacks, so we're just going to stack them together. And then we're going to cut across the diagonal on these as well. And now you'll have 8 different pieces. So we're going to match these with the right sides and the left sides. And there you have your accent pieces and your background pieces. The background pieces for these are cut the same way. The 8-inch square and the 2 7-inch squares cut exactly the same way. Now the background has an additional piece. These are 4.5-inch squares. We're going to cut 2 of those. And it doesn't matter if they're stacked right sides or wrong sides. We're going to cut once on the diagonal. So we'll have 4 pieces. And this will be for our 4 pieces in here, in the left and right. So the measurements I gave you, the 8 inches and the 7 inches, is enough to make 2 blocks. So you'll have 2 lefts and 2 rights. And this is why it's a good way to use up your scraps, because you can usually find an 8-inch square and a couple of 7-inch squares to do this. So on page 2, beginning on page 2, it shows you how to cut the pieces, and that's what I just demonstrated on the video, how to cut the squares and then cut the rectangles in half diagonally. The next section, it talks about the setting triangles, and it tells you how to cut those setting triangles. You'll cut squares, and then you'll cut the squares twice in half diagonally. The next page shows you the sashings, and it tells you how to cut the sashings. And I have 4 different sashings I'm talking about. The first one is the block sashings. Now these go between the blocks to make the Hosanna unit, like I showed you in the beginning, where I took the 4 palm units and put them together. So the block sashing is the small 6.5-inch by 1-inch sashings. The next one is the unit sashings. This is used when you put the units together, and they're 15 inches long, and so this is the piece right here, and it shows to put these 4 blocks together into 1 unit, and we call this the Hosanna unit. So that's the first unit we're going to piece. The next sashing is the row sashings, and these are going to go where you assemble the units into rows, and we'll get into that later. And then the final sashing is when we sew the rows together. So there's 4 different sashings, and we're going to go through those now. The first unit you're going to make after you finish all your paper piecing and you've done all your cutting, and you're going to take 4 plain blocks, 2 block sashings, and 1 unit sashings, and you're going to piece the Hosanna unit right here. Hosanna unit. So you're going to make 18 of those. Next, you're going to piece the side setting unit. And for this, you're going to take 3 palm blocks, 2 setting triangles, that's these here, 3 block sashings, that's 1, 2, 3, and 1 unit sashing, this piece here. And you're going to make 6 of these. These go on the sides of the quilt, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. Next unit you're going to make are the top and bottom units. These go on the top and the bottom. So the block sashing is always 6.5 inches, and the unit sashing is always 15 inches. And you're going to make 4 of these. There's 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. The next unit you're going to make is the upper left, lower right unit. And again, it tells you how many blocks to use and how many sashings to use to make this unit. And you're going to make 2 of those. Then we come up to this part, and we're going to make the upper right and lower left. These are the other 2 corners. And the same thing, you just follow the instructions, put these together, and you're going to make 2 of these as well. So those are your units. You have 5 different units: the Hosanna unit, which are the blocks, the side setting unit, the top and bottom. You have the upper left, lower right, and the upper right, lower left. And now you'll get to see a picture of all of these. Now this might be a little hard to read here, but it's easier to read on the paper. This is the layout of the quilt, and the different colors show the different units. So this blue here is the upper left and lower right, and they're blue, and you made 2 of those. Same thing with the upper right and lower left. Those are shown in the purple or lavender color. We made 2 of those. The top and bottom, there's 4 of those, and they're shown in pink. And then there are 6 of the sides, here and here. And this diagram shows you how they're oriented. So once you make all of those units, you're going to lay your quilt out just like this. The first thing you're going to do is assemble the rows. So this row number 1 is really already assembled. Row number 2, you're going to put a side unit, a Hosanna unit, and a top and bottom unit. And between these 2 units, you're going to put a unit sashing, which is the 15-inch one. And it's shown here on blue. And so go through all of your rows. You have 8 rows, and they all go like this. Make all of your rows using the units and the sashing, the unit sashing, to put those together. After you do that, we're going to, these red lines indicate the final sashing, and that's where to put the rows together. So this tells you up here approximately the size to cut it, but the instructions will tell you that you need to measure first. And these are cut a little bit bigger, so once you sew these together, you'll go right across the edge and trim that off. So download everything and get started on cutting your quilt, and thank you for watching.